It's finally time to talk about my most anticipated leader of OPL3, and that's Blue Nami. It features a totally different way to play the One Piece card game versus any other leader that we have out currently. And while I know it's not going to be the best deck, it's definitely going to be a really good rogue deck. And today what we're going to do is talk through basically a beginner guide. This is going to be the first of a good amount that I've been interested in, or at least like leaders that I've been interested in, and put it in a format where you can learn all of the cards, some of the play-by-play, a deck list, and final thoughts, my personal final thoughts about the deck. You can follow along in the video chapters below as well, and if you have any suggestions about any other leader or any kind of deck, let me know in the comments below as well. First, let's just start with the leader. She has this great permanent effect that sets her apart from all the other leaders, just like I was talking about before. Basically, it states that instead of losing the game when you have no cards in deck, you win automatically. This means that the deck and the player is going to be inherently more defensive and decisive with their responses. Just for playing her, you don't have that many perks outside of her permanent, as she only has one really specific Nami card in Nojoku in OPL3, and it's not a bad one. While there are a few builds out there for Nami, especially post-ban, since we did lose a couple cards for this deck unfortunately, we'll focus on drawing a lot of cards and as well as milling yourself out, basically placing cards from your deck into your trash. That way you get to that alternative win con a lot faster. First off, we do have Kaya, which basically says that you do draw 2 cards and then you trash 2 from your hand. This kind of filters out anything that you don't really need and can be a turn starter. I think it has a good merit to be a 2k counter in your hand as well in a pinch, but most of the time you're just going to be using it just to draw that 2 and just filter through your deck more and more. Then you have Zeph and as well as Belmer, which I probably will be saying a lot of these cards names wrong, but if anything, Zeph and Belmer are basically going to be your main attackers because there's not going to be a lot of character cards you're going to be playing or even swinging with. I didn't even mention that the fact that the Nami leader does have an extra mill if you do land damage and if you attach a Dawn with it too. So really those are going to be only 2 times, well 3 times, I guess all 3 times, Zeph, Belmer, and as well as your leader that you're going to be swinging. Now there are again other builds out there. You can shove in Mihawks, you can shove in maybe even the Impel Down. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but to focus on the archetype specific cards right now, Zeph and Belmer are going to be the best character cards that you can play in order to get to that alternative win con and mill yourself out. Both of these guys basically say that you have to add a Dawn to one of them, get to 7, get to 6, whatever you may be during that turn. Zeph does return a 3 cost, which can include this Kaya and as well as other 3 costs or less on your own field to play it again and draw more cards, which is why Zeph is more useful and more important, but it can also get a 3 cost on their field back to their hand. But both of these guys can mill out 7 when landing damage and you have a Dawn attached. Belmer is okay because on a KO you get to trash 3. Going back to Nojiku, again, pretty much one of the only specific cards that actually have Nami in its text to play with. But the bright side about Nojiku is the fact that you can basically use this with Zeph, you can use this with Overheat and a couple other event cards and character cards that you can be more creative with. But she really comes down to being really useful returning anything that's not red, anything that doesn't have rush basically. I think they're really good. She's really good against skillless cards, any of the 4/6s or less, or even 5/7s or less, really what it comes down to. Some of the blue cards where if they are spending a lot of Dawn to play it, it's going to be really good to just punish that. And as well as green. Green is a really big candidate for Nojiku because something like the 5-drop Yamato secret rare is going to be really good as well. Then we have Boodle, which hopefully I'm saying correctly. It's just a 2-cost blocker. I've been in and out for this card. I mean, it just doesn't really do too much for you. It gets removed pretty easily by Vista or literally anything, especially with a lot of red running around. It just gets removed, which is fine because you still get the on KO effect where you can mill one, but as a blocker, you I mean, I would spend 2 for an event card or 2 anyway. And then we have 4 cost Usopp. Again, another card that I've been back and forth on. The interesting thing about this card is that it reads the same way as Zeph and as well as Belmare, where basically you attach a Don to it, it becomes a 6k. It probably should go to 7 at least. But this time it actually has Rush, so you get that effect to mill 7, which can win you the game effectively. Or you can shove a bunch of these guys into your deck and then basically play it for 4, attach all the Dawn you can, and then swing if they don't have a blocker, you know, that type of thing. But the downside of that is that if you're spending 4, if you're spending 5, 6, 7 Dawn on this guy, that means you're not going to be, if it fails or if it doesn't go through, it might not be worth it, because then you're going to be on the back foot holding all of these other event cards, and as well as other cards that you might not be able to counter without Dawn, and it's just a bit of a downside. So it really depends on what your build looks like, and for me, I think this is more of a surprise card slash win con slash win more card. Now we have other less good cards. I think the best card of all of these is probably Carne, but because he is only a 5 cost, or 5k I should say, instead of a 6k, like it's gonna be more on par with these other cards except for Marco, it's not that good. So let's talk through now some of the blue event cards that I mentioned before. So, I mean, these cards, I think at the end of the day, really come down to the bread and butter, starting with Sanji's Pilaf, which is just silly. It's basically a pot of greed. You draw 2 cards if you pay 3, and the trigger effect is really what you want, which is that draw 2. And more often than not, it does happen. It can win you the game through that alternative win con, and as well as just, you know, getting you more cards to counter with. Then we have Usopp's Rubber Band of Doom, which I think the English translation or the other Japanese translation is a little bit different, but you pay 1 and then you get 2k for your leader or your character, and then you mill 1. And the trigger is basically the same thing. You get to draw 1 and then basically trash 1 from the top of your deck. You mill 1. And I think with Sanji's Pilaf is going to be your starter. Usopp's Rubber Band kind of adds up throughout the entire game. You can get around Whitebeard's 6k swings if they're lazy, and as well as just really anything. Like you can defend yourself with 1ks or multiple 1ks, and eventually it just adds up to that mill alternative win con. Another new addition is going to be the Gum Gum Giant Gavel, which is you pay 1, you trash 1 from your hand, and then you get 4k instead of these 2ks, and then you get to mill 2. Gum Gum Giant Gavel is a bit of a cost where, you know, sure, you have the trash 1, but you're drawing from Sanji's Pilaf, you're drawing from all these other cards and all these other triggers as well. So it isn't so bad. And honestly, if you have a lot of cards in your hand that you don't really care about, most of the time you're going to be able to trash 1 and not feel too bad about it. I think this also goes really well with the Impel Down stuff, because you want to trash stuff and then you play the bigger 7 cost, I believe, Ivankov, or the bigger Ivankov that plays 1 and you draw up to 3. If you empty your hand, the same thing for some of these other event cards we're going to talk about. One of the other ones is going to be the Soga King, which is the secret for the set, or one of the secrets for the set. And on play, you get to return a 6 cost back to the owner's hand, and as well as draw 2, trash 2. So basically it is going to be Kaya with additional effect to draw 2, trash 2, and as well as just returning a 7 cost. It does have a 1k counter, which I like. The permanent or the static isn't all that important, and being a 6k is not that great, but having 1 or 2 of these in your deck isn't too big of a deal. Another card that I don't mind, which by the way, Usopp wasn't an event card, I just wanted to mention it, is the 3000 Worlds. It's a 4 cost, returns a 5 to the bottom of the deck. So some of these cards like Gum Gum Giant Gavel or even Overheat returns to hand, right? And it's not that great. But bottom decking something that has Rush, or bottom decking something that is like a Red Marco, or really anything else, is really, really good. And the trigger is not too bad with the 3 cost costs or less. So let's talk about some other character cards, especially ones that start your turns out as well. So this is the 1 cost Buggy. Look at the top 5. You get a blue Impel Down other than Buggy, and then you place the bottom of the rest. Then we also have Mr. 1, Daz Bones. Oh, I don't know how to say his name, but you get some of these blue event cards that we've been talking about from your trash. It costs 1 back to your hand, which is really, really good because now you get the Desert Spada, you get some of these rubber bands, especially any of the ones that you know you're going to be using continuously throughout the next few turns. Buggy is interesting, the fact that you really don't have a lot of Impel Down targets, or if you do, you're using it to thin out your deck. The Buggy acts as a 1k counter, and as well as just getting things out of your deck more often than not. Plus you can use some of that fodder that we're going to take a look at in a little bit as something for the 1 cost event card that you can trash one. Speaking of Desert Spada has been really good just to plan out some of your defense and as well as what you need later into the game or just the next turn. It's just a good card since set 1 basically, and it shouldn't let you down in combination to these other effects. So if you Desert Spada, you draw 1 and then you Sanji Spiloff, you know the first 3 cards that you'll be able to draw. Now, one of the cards that we were talking about before is going to be Impel Down Stars or All Stars. I was looking at like previous decks, especially ones in Asia and other like international deck lists and tournaments, and I was wondering why they play this, because you don't get the Activate main card. Well, the 2 reasons is, one is that you want the trigger to draw 2, so that's going to be really good. Well, I guess 3 reasons. Another one is that it is perfect fodder to pitch for the 1 cost event card that we're talking about, and Buggy does get it. Again, deck thinning is deck winning. Deathwink is another target, which basically says that you get 6k power for paying 3 as a counter, and the trigger effect is really good to disrupt a lot of big plays. It doesn't hit a lot of these like 8 well, I guess it does hit like yellow Charlotte Linlin and like really a bunch of stuff. It's kind of endless. Like, yeah, that's all I can really say. Like like 6k power is a lot. The trigger is really good, and then you get to draw cards if you have no card. Well, draw cards until you have 2 cards in your hand. Again, this really plays well to defending everything out of your hand. If you know they're gonna be swinging for like a 12k or 15k kid or something like that, this is really good in dumping your entire hand, going into 0, and then playing the Deathwink on your last counter step. So if anything, that is pretty much the idea of it. You're surviving and you're drawing cards, and it really fits perfectly with this deck. Now, some of the other staples that you might want in your deck is going to be Overheat and Level Up Beam. So I've been going a little less on the Level Up Beams because they're kind of situational. I'd rather use Overheat or some of these other 1 cost counter cards, but Overheat's really good because you get 4k power for 2, and you get to return a 3 cost or less. That can be Mr. 1, that can be a Kaya, that can be a Buggy to look at the top 5 again, etc. The trigger is really good as well, which is another reason why I play this at 4 and not so much at Level Up Beam at 4, right? So it's more of a variance thing where more often than not, you'll probably be able to get that trigger effect through Overheat. Level Up Beam is cool because of the same concept of Deathwink. You just counter cards until you get to less than 3, and then on that final 3rd card, or the 3rd card from your hand, you get to use a Level Up Beam to defend yourself, and then you get to draw 1 to replace it. So again, you really want these cards to keep drawing you cards, keep milling yourself out, and keep defending the most efficient way, and eventually you'll understand exactly what you need to do. When we get to the turn-by-turn suggestions, and as well as just in general, I think what it really comes down to is just getting the right cards into your hand, and as well as drawing as much as you can early on, and then defending as much as you can later on. The first thing I would suggest is either going to be a Buggy or a Kaya for turn 1. You really want to get someone of your Impel Down Stars, or not Impel Down Stars, but any of your Impel Down targets, and Kaya is going to be able to filter out immediately, and then you can draw into an Overheat or something else that returns back like a Zeph. And Zeph will probably be a little bit later on, depending on if you go first or second. And I think in this deck, it doesn't really matter which turn you take, first or second. I personally think either one is fine. Second is probably fine, or better, I should say, because you get to draw an extra card and because you get to play maybe one or two Kayas or Buggies. But on the other end of it is that you're giving an extra a body on board for your opponent, which is not that great. But turn 2 is usually always going to be Sanji's Pilaf. If you can hold 1 or 2 for a Desert Spada or another event card. Turn 3, you want to get a Zeph out if you can, if you're not going against red or black, which is going to be the two things that are going to be kind of annoying for you. You should be able to defend against red. If not, just hold up those that Dawn if you need to, or if you can. Turn 4 is going to be another Sanji's Pilaf if you can. Just resolve as many of those as possible. Mr. 1 to get back some of those event cards that you're holding or defending with. Love Beam if your hand is getting a little bit low. And then another Zeph, again, depending on what your matchup is. All right, let's talk about my deck list, or at least one that I suggest that you start out with just in general if you're learning to play with Nami and just just trying to see what works for you and what you want to change to. This really plays out a lot of the staples, and as well as just the stuff that is very, very standard for Nami, right? You play 4 of the Kaya, 4 of the Mr. Bones and Buggy, 4 of the Zephs. I don't even play Belmare because I don't think that's worth it. Donjuku at 2 I think is perfectly fine. The 1 of Usopp, well, 2 of Usopps for 1 ofs for the 4 cost and as well as the 7 cost, they do come up, and I think I'm back and forth on 1 ofs and One Piece just in general, because I think sometimes it just doesn't allow you to have 1 ofs, especially if they're not searchable. So if you want to bump those up to 2 or just remove them, that is up to you. Desert Spotted at 3, I think at 4 is not too bad. Again, ratios are going to be changing a little bit, and then all these other cards are really going to be at 4 for your event cards, except for Love and as well as 3000 Worlds, because both of those are going to be situational. All these other ones are not. You're going to be able to use those pretty much at any time except for All Stars, which again are just going to be for Buggy and as well as just pitching for Kaya and other effects. That should wrap it up, I think. In general, Nami is going to be my favorite deck out of OP03. I will be playing it. I don't know about competitively, but I'm going to give it a shot if I can. I think Shenron maybe. Who knows? Who knows what the format's going to look like in August? But if anything, hopefully you enjoyed. I think my final thoughts on this is that it is pretty much a completely different way to play the game, right? It does remind me a little bit of like Security Control, but that's like more of Big Mom, I guess, since you're placing stuff. But you do have a lot of triggers. You do have a lot of stuff that you have to defend with. So I guess that's the comparison for me. If you like math, it's just a lot of math involved into this deck, where you really have to make sure that you're using the right amount of Dawn, the right amount of counter, the right amount of defense for their offense, that type of thing. Winning feels pretty good. I don't know if you could do it for like 8 or 9 rounds in like a treasure cup or something like that, but it does feel pretty good in general to win with the deck with the alternative win con. Some of the cons basically come down to like the bigger bodies like Whitebeard, the 9-drop Whitebeard or the 10-drop Linlin. I don't know, even some of the blue cards, or even the 8-cost boy, the Kinemon, there you go, the Odin. Those type of things are really annoying to deal with. You don't really have that many answers, if any. So you really have to defend. So multiple things of that, or even multiple attacks. Like a really good player can pretty much put out many attacks. Like Zoro can put out 4 or 5 different attacks that are all for 5 or 7. Like if you swing 5, 6, 7, whatever it may be, and the Nami doesn't have answers to remove the board, which a lot of them just return back to hand, which is not that great anyway, it just becomes out of hand. So, and you only have so much Dawn to play with, and so many cards at hand. So unless you have a really good hand to defend against a lot of attacks that are really good numbers, like 5, 7, 9, those are going to be really difficult situations to get out of. But you do have a lot of tools. You do have a lot of event cards. You do have a lot of a pretty decent blue card pool in general to figure out some of those matchups. So I would go ahead and start with this deck list, and as well as just learn all the cards that you can for Nami and just in general, and then try it on the sim, try it on you know, tabletop, locals, and as well as soon as the set comes out in the next few weeks, go ahead and have some fun with it. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.